So now we come to the final part of the hero's journey, the return. We've followed our hero then from the innocent world of childhood to an initial call of adventure, which creates a separation at the crossing of the first threshold, usually followed then by some initial trial whereby the hero can no longer return home. Then he begins the phase of initiation through various trials, whether they be dragon battles or brother battles or abductions, until at the low point of the story, the hero experiences some kind of symbolic death or dismemberment. After that death occurs, there is a various means of atonement that the hero can face, either through the goddess, through a marriage, through a atonement or recognition by the father, through some kind of power, through apotheosis or becoming divinity, or through the achieving of some goal. And sometimes, of course, a mix of all four of these things. And then a lot of our stories kind of seem to end somewhere in here, or this last little bit anyway becomes a little truncated. We're most interested in the hero's achievement of the goal. But Campbell suggested that the true hero is going to experience a final return back into the top part of this sphere. So another way of looking at the hero's journey is to consider the top part of the sphere, kind of above the equator, if you will, as the known world, and the bottom part as the unknown world. Sometimes people look at this as the conscious world and the subconscious world. There's a lot of different ways to think about it. But the idea here that the hero moves from the known world into the unknown, experiencing all these various trials and means of atonement, and then finally, after having achieved what he set out to achieve, crossing back across that barrier of the known and unknown into the known, and bringing with him then the new power, the new understanding that he has accrued as a result of his journey. So a couple ways to return that we'll just briefly look at would include rescue without, magic flight, resurrection, and the hero at the end, according to Campbell, has some kind of connection of either experiencing himself as a master of two worlds or finding some freedom to live. Not all heroes will come home, though, and oftentimes the hero will refuse to return. Why should he return after all? He's achieved what he set out to achieve. He's in the place he wants to be in. A great example of this is Huck Finn, which I think many of you have read. In which he says, I reckon I got to light out through the territory ahead of the rest because Aunt Sally, she's going to adopt me and civilize me, and I can't stand it. I've been there before. Huck says, I cannot return into the world of the known. I've been there already. I must continue the adventure. I must stay in, I must continue out into new territory, new adventure. You can look at that as a sign of Huck's heroism, that he refuses to settle for a society that he abhors, or you can view that as a failure for Huck. He never actually comes to full maturity. He continues to just be a child adventuring out in the wilderness. All right, here's an easy example of the magic flight. Here's a good example of rescue from without, or what we could sometimes consider deus ex machina, which means God in the machine. A lot of older stories, Greek and Roman stories, these writers would write themselves into corners, and the plot would be so thick and it would be so difficult to kind of figure out how the hero is going to get out of the situation that the author would just have a god show up and figure it out. And that kind of feels like what happens at the end of Lord of the Rings. Frodo and Sam have just succeeded in destroying the ring, which is the magic, or which is the ultimate boon. And then in order for them to get back home, they need rescue from higher beings, in this case, eagles who swoop in to carry them off. At the crossing of the return threshold, again, we are now entering back into the world of the known, and I hope you'll forgive a brief digression into the Lord of the Rings. The movies don't handle this part of the book, but it's a very important part of the book. So at the end of the Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, Tolkien writes this entire chapter called The Scoring of the Shire. And what's happened in the midst of the various adventures of these hobbits in Middle-earth is that an evil presence has returned back to the Shire. So they started at the Shire in the beginning when there was an initial call to adventure. And then for the majority of the books, they are in this initiation phase of achieving the quest and striving to destroy the ring. But at the end, they return without any supernatural aid. Gandalf's not there with them. Without any of their previous companions, Legolas and Gimli and Aragorn. Instead, it's just four hobbits who are coming now into a real problem that only they can solve. And they're able to show that they've grown and become true heroes when, without the aid of any of the companions that they've had prior in their adventures, they themselves are able to rid the Shire of this evil. And that kind of maturity that they show in their heroism is proof that they deserve to return home. They've shown in this final adventure that they've had tested mettle, that they are now able to return home and experience the freedom to live. The Master of Two Worlds is usually represented by a transcendental hero. You can think of the Buddha or a Christ figure, some kind of character that is able to kind of straddle the unknown and the known at the same time. I think of Bran here as the three-eyed raven. And I'm recording this prior to season 8. So by the time you'll listen to this, maybe this all will have changed. But you have a sense here of someone who has come to new power, and as a result of that, certain things cannot be true of them anymore. One of the things that I think we're interested in following in this next Avengers movie is how Bruce Banner and the Hulk kind of work out this dichotomy. Is there going to be mastery here, or is there going to be separation? Those are some of the things that we look for in our characters, to be able to have unity across two sorts of being that seem divergent. The true hero who returns finally after his adventures will experience the freedom to live. He'll experience the end of the adventure and a successful return home, and the opportunity to take that newfound wisdom and share it with others within community. And I think one of the coolest examples of that is at the end of Harry Potter. There's no more adventures, and it seems like when we flash forward to see Harry as an old man, or an older man, I suppose, that he's been able to come back and live a relatively peaceful life. That discomfort he felt at the beginning of not being welcome in his home, of not fitting into his community, he has solved through the various levels of the hero's journey, and he now is free to have a life. He's free to live, to feel at home, to feel at ease, and to share that wisdom with other people. All right, so that's the hero's journey. It's worth noting that not every story follows this, and a lot of people look at this actually and think it's kind of silly, or that it's kind of it's a little too tidy. But if we're thoughtful about some of our stories, you'll see that there are elements of this structure that exist all over the place in how we tell our stories. That these three phases are really essential phases in the kinds of stories that we revere, which continue to be and have been from time immemorial stories about heroes.